Hey everybody, this is Josh from jasonphotography.com. This is my first tutorial. I just want to walk all you guys through kind of my workflow on what I do to process a Milky Way picture. I'm by no means an expert. The things I do may not be right, they may not be wrong, they may be different, but this is what I do. And every time I process an image, I learn something new. And I know as a budding photographer, it's really hard to find the resources that you want to answer the questions that you have. Sometimes the simplest things can seem really hard and they can just kind of seem to go right over your head. Personally, my biggest struggle has been sharpening, finding a technique that finishes off an image without looking really crunchy and blocky and really contrasty. So that's really what I've been focusing on. So yeah, let's get right into it. This was a shot that I took at Otter Point in Acadia National Park back in September. My girlfriend and I found this spot during the day. We decided to go and pick up a pizza in Bar Harbor and took it out to this spot, and we got there, we set up, we found our composition, we waited for the light to get nice and soft right before sunset, took a few bracketed exposures, found focus at infinity, and were able to shoot our foreground at a nice low ISO for a really clean image. And then we waited for the sun to set while we ate our pizza, and then as soon as blue hour finished, we just took our Milky Way pictures about an hour after we got there. But this shot was an accident. This was one of those moments where I just clicked the shutter and we turned, I don't know if this was a headlamp or this might have been our little LED lantern. I don't typically like light painting. I think it kind of just makes certain images look fake, but I just thought this was kind of cool. It just kind of gave some soft light on the rocks through here. A little bit harsh here. It's a little bit distracting. Of course, we have a plane coming through the image up here, and then you'll notice this big red streak. This was an issue with the lens I was using at the time. This was the Nikon 16-35 f4. Not a hugely popular astro lens, being that it's an f4. It's a fantastic daytime landscape lens, really sharp, very little distortion, and it's really easy to use filters with. It's not like the 14-24 that I have now, where you have to buy these big giant dinner plate glass filters, and it's a nightmare. But it's a much better astro lens, and I couldn't really justify having two different lenses, one for daytime, one for nighttime. So I kind of sold my soul to the devil to get the 14-24, but I'm not regretting it. It's an awesome lens. I think every landscape photographer can attest to that, but now I'm babbling. So let's get right into it. The first thing that I'm going to do here is I'm going to go down to my tone curve, and I'm going to apply a strong contrast curve. You'll see that this is going to make the picture really dark and really contrasty, but basically what I'm doing this for is because I have some vignetting up here in the corners, and obviously I could go down here to lens corrections and remove chromatic aberration, as we should always do, and enable profile corrections. What I don't like about this is that it can sometimes tend to stretch the corners and sometimes tend to overcompensate for the vignette. This one actually isn't too bad. What I might do is I might go back in here and I might add just a little vignetting back in, only because it looked like there was quite a bit of noise up here in this corner, but it actually looks pretty good. So we'll close this, we'll go back up, and we will put this curve back to linear. We'll come back to 100%. Now the second thing I do is I find my white balance, and most of the time when I'm shooting astro, I'll be down in like the 3200 or 3300 Kelvin. but this is one of those odd times where I probably wasn't really paying attention. I had my white balance set quite a bit warmer because we were shooting our foreground at sunset. So what I typically do to find white balance is I will crank my vibrance way up all the way and saturation way up. This is obviously looks terrible, but what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to find a nice balance to get the galactic core here is that nice kind of amber orange color, but you know the sky is blue, so try to find a nice balance there. Maybe pull some magenta out a little bit. There's obviously magenta. There's a little bit of light pollution here. It's kind of orangey magenta, and then there is obviously some magenta in the Milky Way. And then I will back those back off. So now you'll notice the picture is really bland. It almost looks completely desaturated, and that's because we neutralized our colors. So now what I do, kind of some global adjustments. What I think I'm actually going to do with this is I'm going to double process this. I'm going to make a duplicate layer, or a duplicate of this image. And what you do is you right click and you're going to go to create virtual copy. Now Lightroom will make 2 copies of this image that are the same. And I'm doing this because I really like this foreground, and I really like the temperature of the foreground. But what we're going to do to the sky is going to be a little bit crazy. We're going to have to do some things to pull this Milky Way out and make it pop a little bit more. So we're going to leave our first copy as the sky copy. And we're going to pull the whites up, pull our highlights down, maybe pull those whites a little back up a little bit more. Blacks down, see, this is what I mean. This is the things we're going to have to do to the sky are going to just make this foreground look terrible. So we're going to edit them separately, and then we're going to, later on, we're going to go in and we're going to blend them together in Photoshop. It's super easy. We'll pull these blacks down, maybe put the shadows just up a little. Add just a little bit more contrast, maybe just a little bit of clarity. Careful on your clarity slider. If you are going to try to edit an entire single frame, the clarity can make your shadows bunch up really quickly. It can make your picture look really crunchy. So later on, when you get it into Photoshop and you're sharpening, you're going to notice that it just doesn't look very good. So I like this. I like the sky so far. We're gonna just add a little bit of vibrance. Vibrance tends to saturate non-pure colors. So if you've got colors that are like in between green and blue and red and yellow, the vibrance is going to saturate those colors a little bit better and more naturally than saturation. So I like to use vibrance over saturation if I can, but I'll always add a little bit of saturation. I like that so far, but it's feeling a little bit blue to me, so I'm going to pull back toward yellow a little, and then I'm going to pull the green down. Maybe somewhere in there. Let's just make this a negative even 20 because I'm crazy. That actually looks pretty good to me. So highlights down a little bit more, whites up a little bit. Just trying to get that sky just a little darker. Just pull, there we go. That looks good. So now what we're gonna do, so this is kind of that point where you need to decide, do you want to dodge and burn your Milky Way here in Lightroom? To me, it's a little bit more cumbersome to do in Lightroom. I think it's probably only because I'm a little bit more comfortable in Photoshop on 50% gray layers. Dodging and burning with just swapping between a white and a black brush is super easy. What I might do here is I might just take one of these radial gradient filters, and I'm just gonna kind of make an ellipse here, kind of eyeball it, roughly the size of our Milky Way. And this is cool because you can rotate it. Just kind of line it up with our Milky Way, neutralize everything down to 0. Now if you see, if I can do crazy stuff to this. Oop, it's inverting for some reason. See if I can, there we go. You can see you can do crazy things with this, but a little bit can go a long way. So I'm just gonna be really kind of subtle here, because I don't want it to look completely fake. I don't want it to look like I did anything too crazy. So what I might just do is I'm gonna just bump exposure just a little, bump the contrast a little, shadows, whites, and pull my blacks down. A little bit more clarity, a little bit more saturation. Nope, no saturation. Don't like that. And we'll call it done. So now, I think our sky is looking pretty good. I might just add a gradient filter here. Just pull it down. It's adding magenta in there as a default, and I don't know why. I might just pull some saturation over the whole thing. Over here, it's still feeling a little blue, so back it off just a little. Maybe just add. There we go. I think that looks pretty good. Now this is obviously compared to, let's compare it to the other one where we did minimal editing. It looks terrible, but that sky doesn't look that bad. The sky looks pretty good. That Milky Way definitely pops a lot more. We didn't really do anything with the detail portion of this. So let's go down here, try to mitigate maybe a little bit of this noise. Lightroom automatically defaults to 25% sharpening. I'm going to turn that off because I'm going to add just a little tiny bit of noise to this, and I don't want it to be smudging any of the sharpening. So we're just going to add a little bit. You can see this is with nothing. The default settings of 25 for color noise reduction is huge. This is what it looks like. Let's keep in mind this was shot at 4500 ISO, and that's mainly due to my lens being so slow. But back into 100%. We'll go back on here. We'll turn on details. Put that color noise reduction back on. We'll see that that 5% sharpening did a great job. And now I'm just going to bump up the sharpening a little bit. So we applied our noise reduction first, so it smoothed out the image, and now it's going to sharpen only stars, really, or what little noise is left in the image. But we're going to try to fix that with some masking. If you press and hold just Alt or Option, and you pull your masking slider over, you're going to see it turns black and white. Now this is very similar to like a high pass filter in Photoshop. White reveals, black conceals. So right now it's masking the sharpening, and it's concealing the sharpening in all of the areas that are black. So it's only applying that sharpening to the stars. Sometimes it's easier to visualize what it's doing without pressing and holding Alt or Option. And you can see here's with no masking. Let it catch up for a second. And here's with tons of masking. So you can see it basically takes the sharpening effect completely away. So we're just going to keep this kind of down low here in like well, we'll try 15. 15 probably looks pretty good. 15 looks good. Our Milky Way is nice and soft, and our stars are nice and sharp. Now, something about this Milky Way is just driving me nuts. I think I'm going to pull a little bit more of this magenta out. And push it. All right, I think I'm going to get rid of this gradient. And I'm going to add a new one. I'm just going to add a new one. I'm actually going to... I didn't like how dark it was getting at the top of the frame, so I added this gradient and I just bumped up the exposure a little bit, and it just kind of balanced out the sky. You want the horizon is naturally going to be a little bit darker unless you have loads of light pollution, but I'm not really sure what's over there. We're looking south-southwest here in Acadia, so I mean this is the southern coast of Maine over here somewhere. Here's an airplane. I like to call it a UFO, but it's obviously an airplane. Sky looks good now. I'm happy with that. I'm happy with the white balance. I'm happy with the color. I might spend more time and tweak this and kind of get this yellow to be a little bit more amber, but in the basic panel, I think we're going to leave it alone for now. And I'm going to close this up, close detail up, and go back up here to the HSL. This is hue, saturation, and luminance. You can single out which one you want to do. This is color, so this is going to like kind of colorize the whole image. I never ever use this. Very rarely do I use black and white. I usually do my conversions in Photoshop. But back to the HSL, this is the hue, saturation, and luminance. Because I have this kind of gnarly reddish magenta purpley band here, I'm going to try to pull a little bit of that out here before I get into Photoshop. I'm just going to oversaturate those colors to see which one is predominantly in there, because if it is magenta, like I think it might be, this is one of those times where it's an unpure color, so it's not magenta, it's very subtly purple, and it's not red. So unfortunately I'm going to not be able to do anything with that here in Lightroom with my white balance set the way it is. But that's okay. I'm going to bump up that yellow a little, or orange, I'm sorry. Bump up maybe the yellow a little. And I can also play with the luminance of those colors, kind of just anything in that Milky Way that's yellow or orange. I can just kind of pull up the luminance a little bit and make it pop. This is kind of like dodging and burning, color dodging. And it's kind of has a pretty cool. It's really easy to destroy an image by going overboard with these, because if there's color separation that's very abrupt, you're going to see it when you bump up the saturation or the luminance, and it's just not going to look very good. So just take note that it's better to be very subtle with these, with this whole panel in Lightroom. Split toning we're not going to mess with, detail we're not going to mess with, lens corrections we're not going to mess with. So since this is just our sky layer, we're going to kind of leave it here, and we're going to move over to the digital copy. And now we're just going to focus on this foreground, which almost looks pretty good as it is. I might just warm it up a touch. Maybe pull. It's a little green, so it's nighttime. Nighttime to me is always a little bit magenta, yellow. I always kind of lean toward those colors anyway. I like warmer colors, almost without even realizing it. Exposure, I'm just going to maybe bump up 0.15 shadows. Don't really want to touch because it's going to pull a lot of noise, and I don't like noise. So we're going to leave shadows at 0. Press and hold Option or Alt to find our white point. Back it off 1. And our black point. It's probably pretty close. Yeah, it's really close. Leave it right there. Pull our vibrance up again. I'm going to go 50. It's kind of like the number I always go to. Lightroom hates me. 50. And we're maybe just going to go plus 10 on saturation. That looks pretty good. But now I'm thinking I might need to back off this yellow a little. Get those greens green again. That looks pretty good. Not going to mess with the contrast. Nighttime scenes are always a little bit less contrasty because there's no harsh light to cause shadows. So we're going to leave that. Our tone curve, we're going to leave alone. Actually, I'll just pull up the lights a little. Maybe the darks just a little. Like I said, I don't want to mess with the shadows or the darks too much because I don't like that noise. So yes, maybe we'll just leave those alone. A lot of this is just kind of, even still, as much as you can be involved in Lightroom and Photoshop, it's always a good idea to kind of play with settings because, sometimes you forget things. Sometimes you get so pigeonholed into doing the same workflow all the time that you forget, like, hey, like there's these little sliders down here that work a little bit differently than just my shadows or blacks up here, and sometimes it's good to just play with those settings. It's just a good idea to do that. I'm gonna go to the HSL slider again. I'm just gonna try to bump up some greens. I like green. I'm gonna bump up those greens. And I think that's it. Split toning, nothing. Lens corrections, we already did that before we made 2 copies. And we're just going to go to detail. In detail, and we'll do a little bit of noise reduction. Probably here, go again to 465. Oops. Now we'll do it. There is some noise, but hot pixel there. Can handle those later. Color noise looks good. Let's see what it looks like without it. Yeah, not as bad as it did before. Back up there. If you double click on the little slider or the names of the sliders over here, it will automatically return those to default settings. Just a little trick. And I'm going to pull our sharpening up to 100, but don't worry, I know it looks terrible. I'm going to pull our radius way down. Now it's a little grainy, but when you're out at 100%, it's not bad. It might be tolerable. And I'm doing this now only because I almost prefer the sharpening that Lightroom does to RAW and DNG files better than the sharpening techniques in Photoshop. But it took me a long time to figure this out. It was just recently I started going back and editing files like this one from last September. Here it is, almost March of 2016, and I'm still struggling with the whole sharpening technique. But just recently I was like, well, what if I apply more sharpening in Lightroom and I don't sharpen later in Photoshop, or just do minimal sharpening later in Photoshop? And I've actually been much happier with the end result when I do it this way. And the only reason I didn't before is because I don't remember what photographer I was watching tutorials of, but he said don't do any sharpening in Lightroom. and I never questioned why, and I still don't really understand why, because now I'm doing it to my images, and I'm liking them far more than I was not doing any sharpening in Lightroom. So again, it's one of those things. Have a deft hand, don't go nuts. Just kind of do what you have to be happy, knowing that later on, you can do more. But I think I'm really happy with this the way it is. So now we've got two files, one for the sky, one for the foreground. I think it looks really good. Only thing I might do here, and this is going to make it easier to blend later on, and since we're not going to use the sky, is I'm going to apply a gradient to our sky to make it bluer. And greener. And darker. Maybe that's too green. I kind of want it to kind of match our other sky if we can. At least get close. It's going to be kind of crazy. Maybe we went a little too far, but this is going to make our blend later on a lot easier. I went way too blue. That. Alright, I think that's pretty close. Nope. Not even kind of. Let's try it again. If you're proficient in masking in Photoshop using luminosity masks, or you're just really good with selecting, making selections, making masks, then you might not have to worry about this. I know from editing this file before that it was a nightmare trying to blend these, because my two images were just so drastically different. I think we're kind of getting closer though. And because we're doing this on a gradient, it's not affecting the rest of the image. I'm actually going to apply a second gradient over this, and that's to combat, get rid of that. If you press and hold shift when you drag your gradient down, it will snap it perfectly horizontal to the top of your frame, and that's what we wanted. And I just want to pull some of the contrast out before, like we did, so that the skies blend together a little bit better. There we go. I think now we're pretty. It's still a little blue. Maybe one more. And this is going to help with our transition zone too. Like, because this foreground was accidentally light painted, you've got this unnatural light in the foreground that's kind of trailing off to a darker scene in the background. It just seems, it makes it a little bit more natural, and that's okay. Add a little bit more green. Okay. All right. Well, I'm not going to spend any more time trying to match those. I think we'll be all right when we get into Photoshop. What we might have a problem with, though, is this brightness. So this is one of those times where might be handy to take your brush tool and just make it big, really soft. And have your feather up all the way. I bring my density down a little bit, my flow down a little. We're just going to pull exposure down just a little, maybe half a stop. We're just going to brush in this area. Now, be careful if you have your auto mask on, because anything that's within kind of this center ring near the plus symbol, it's going to try to protect those high contrast areas like this, and sometimes you'll get weird halos. So a lot of times what you should do in cases like this, where you're trying to get in close to that trees, you're going to take auto mask off. And I'm going to brush back in there again. Now, just kind of goof with it a little here. Just really kind of bright over here, so we want to just neutralize that a little bit so it's not so glaringly obvious later on. Remember, we're just kind of looking at this area. This is our transition zone, and it's very high contrasting in both images. But I think our transition zones are going to be, the transition zones are going to be good. Might just go back to that brush, click on it again, and then we can kind of just re-edit everything we just did. So pull the exposure up a little. There. All right. Those are two images. If you shift click on both of them, highlight them both, right click, edit in, and open as layers in Photoshop. Now, because this was these two files were duplicates of the same file, we will not have to auto align them in Photoshop, but it's always good practice when you get into Photoshop with two images that you're going to blend together of the same scene to edit and auto align. Usually Photoshop does a really good job of this, but sometimes it doesn't, and you have to go in and warp and stretch and move a layer around. But now it's got our two images open in Photoshop. Let's see what it looks like. All right. Now, because we tried to get our skies really close in Lightroom, this is going to be super easy blend. So we want our sky on the top of the stack, and holding Option or Alt and clicking on the mask button, we're going to conceal the sky. Let's see if I turn this mask on and off. There's our sky. So typically here I might first go in and kind of just look at our channels, our alpha channels, just to kind of see what, probably the blue might make a good selection of the sky, and I'm talking in terms of masking. These channels, red, green, and blue, they all kind of isolate the colors differently, and these can all be generated as masks. So if we hit Command and click on blue and make a mask, you'll see if we click on it, it default names it Alpha 1. Now if we click on that, you can see the sky is kind of really selected. It's at least 50% gray. The trees are black. So we could use this mask to brush in our sky pretty easily. But what we can do with these masks is we can actually add adjustments to the masks and make them even more selective. So I might make my darks darker with a curves layer, brights brighter, but it doesn't really seem to be helping me. Pull that out there. Pull this out. Brighten the whole thing and then crush my blacks again. Makes it a little bit more selective. We'll just see how this looks. So now that we've done that, Command click again on that mask. Now you'll see kind of the marching ants. They're just kind of dancing around the stars. If you hit Command H, you'll hide the dancing ants, marching ants, and you have a selection made. Now, so if you go to your mask and you hit B for brush tool, pull up a nice soft brush, make it nice and big, make sure white is selected, and your opacity is at 100. You might start lower, but you don't need to. Make a nice big brush. And just start brushing in. And because we made a selection based on the blue channel, it's kind of self-feathering. And this is kind of an intro into luminosity masking, which is probably the most valuable tool in landscape photography processing. It's something I've been focusing on learning a lot, and it's completely transformed my editing. It makes selections, really finite selections, getting in between trees, blending in skies, dodging and burning selectively, very controlled. It's an awesome thing. We'll cover that maybe later. Or maybe I'll just direct you to other tutorials that are way more knowledgeable on the subject. I'm just barely scraping the surface on how to use them, but you can see if we hit Alt Option now that we've kind of brushed in that sky, look at our mask. So if we turn this on and off, you can see what it's affecting. It's just kind of affecting our sky and our transition zone right where we wanted it. And we can even switch brush colors, maybe lower our brush and go in there and even paint some of it back out if we wanted to, if we didn't like any of the kind of overlap. But I didn't even notice it. But if you Command D on a Mac, you're going to deselect your mask. So now you'll notice if you go in and you start painting, white brush, it's going to be really nasty. So I'll get rid of that. So now we've got our sky blended into our foreground, and it looks really natural and it's pretty clean. We've got our noise reduced sky for the Milky Way. It's nice and contrasty. Milky Way pops really nicely and it blends seamlessly into our foreground. And we mitigated some of that red band pretty well. There's still some here in the tree, but we can fix that later, or we can leave it. It's not really that noticeable, and there's some things we can do for that, kind of a little bit more advanced, but typically from here I will go to Layer, Layer, new fill layer, new adjustment layer. No. If you hit and hold Alt Option and start a new layer, this dialog box is going to come up and you're going to change your blend mode to soft light. And you'll see this little fill with soft light neutral color 50% gray highlights, and you're going to click on that. And this is going to be D and B, dodge and burn layer. It's a good habit to get into to name your layers. Sometimes, especially on Milky Way images, all landscape images, you're going to end up with a huge amount of layers. And sometimes if you finish a file and a couple days later you want to go back and redo something because you didn't like it, it makes it a lot easier to find those layers and those adjustments. So do yourself a favor and name your layers. I was stubborn for a long time, but I'm really been hard on myself about doing it lately. But you'll notice that this layer is gray, but it's invisible. But if we change our blend mode back to normal, it's literally a 50% gray layer. We don't want that. We want soft light. And what that's going to do, if we pull up a brush again and we just start painting on it with black, it's going to darken using the soft light blending mode. So it's going to really darken those shadows, and it's kind of really ugly. And if we get rid of that, and we do it at a low opacity, like 5 or 10, you know, we can paint in areas that we don't like. 10 is, oop, I changed it to 50. We can paint in the areas that we kind of want to hide, or we want to darken to take attention away from. And a lot of times this is done to add a little bit more dimension to an image. I don't really do a lot of burning per se unless I have areas that are really distracting. Like I really didn't like this kind of noisy, weird shadow thing over here. I kind of didn't like these rocks. I thought maybe they were a little bit distracting. I kind of want your eye to go from here kind of up into the sky. And if you just hit X and you switch back to white, and you paint on areas that you want more attention on. Maybe this rock here, this rock here, this rock here. It's kind of around the things that you find interesting. You know, maybe highlighted areas, add a little bit more contrast. Just always do this at a very low opacity and let it build up. And always use a soft brush, or else it'll just look terrible if we go to a hardness of 100% here with our brush. We paint, I mean, it makes a straight line and it doesn't look good. We'll change our hardness back to 0. Honestly, because of the accidental light painting, the foreground doesn't need a ton of dodging and burning. You know, I may not have done this. I guess it doesn't look bad. It looks pretty natural, and it does kind of take care of those distracting little weird shadows I didn't like on up there. Another good habit is to do your dodging and burning in multiple layers, multiple steps, and let it build up too, because you know what you did for the foreground, if you wanted to mask some of that out or you wanted to erase some of that, you know, you'd only have to do it here versus, you know, if I did the whole image on one layer, it's just easier this way. So if we do that again, another layer, let's call it D and B sky this time. Here, I'm going to go down to opacity of 5. It's just kind of where I'm more comfortable. I usually work at 5 or less and really let it build up. I'll switch over to my Wacom tablet here. And I'm on a white brush. The other cool thing about these 50% gray layers is you can actually dodge and burn with color. So I might just hit Alt, pick up my color picker. I find this weird like ambery yellow color or gross ugly brown. Pull it up here. Maybe I want to make it a little bit more orange, a little bit more peachy. As long as it's, if you pull up our color picker here, as long as you're above here, it's going to lighten the image. Obviously, the closer to white you get, the more it's going to lighten. The closer to black you get, the more it's going to darken. But as long as you're up here at the top toward white, it's going to lighten the image. So color especially you need to be really subtle with, because it can make things kind of get weird real fast. I just wanted to add some more peachy amber yellow to the highlighted areas of this Milky Way. And I'll hit X, switch back to my dark colors. Maybe pull dark blue. Actually, I'm just going to go straight black. We'll go straight black. It's not going to be bad. I'm going to brush smaller. I'm just going to kind of trace around here in the galactic core and kind of like these veiny things. I'm not an astronomer. I'm not an astrologist. I don't really know the names of the nebula here, this little pink guy. You know, I'm sure there are names for all these weird little varicose veins in the Milky Way, but I don't know them. And I don't know if I ever will know them. My brain can only handle so much information. But just a little dodging, a little burning. Just kind of give it a little bit more detail. Kind of turn that on and off, see what we're doing here. It's subtle. It's subtle, but if we turn it back to normal here, we can kind of see our brush strokes. Very, very, very subtle. And I know here it kind of just looks like chaos, like termites chewing its way through a tree branch, but it's good. It's subtle, and it actually adds more punch to the Milky Way, and I really like that. Detail. I'm all for detail. So another thing I like to do, you can do it up here in the navigator and just look at this little thumbnail. And what this does, it kind of gives you a rough idea of what it's going to look like on social media. You know, looking at it from a phone, looking at it from far away can kind of reveal some problem areas, or areas that are overdone, overcooked, too contrasty, not contrasty enough. But this is kind of what I'll do, you know, toward the end of processing an image. I'll kind of just zoom out to really far. You know, the image is really tiny, even smaller than it would be on a phone, and just kind of see if it has that pop, that visual interest. I think it looks pretty good. I think that Milky Way looks pretty awesome. But this red band that you don't really notice when you're in close, but I noticed it like crazy, and maybe it's because I'm looking for it, but so what I might do here, below my dodging and burning layers, is I'm going to pull up we'll try a hue saturation. We'll see if this fixes it. I'll grab my little slider here, and I'll pick this color. See, it's calling it blue, and it's calling it blue because it's not a pure color, like I said before. But so hue saturation is not going to work. I'm going to get rid of that layer. This is a really cool trick I learned from Danny Diamond. He's a portrait photographer. But this is awesome. This is a trick that I used a lot in dealing with the night images I took with this lens, because I had this red band in every long exposure I took at night, and I hated it. And another big reason I got rid of the lens. But pull up a curves layer. Make sure you are on the little curves icon, not the mask. So make sure you're selected there, and you're going to pick your top eyedropper. Double click it, and it's going to pull up your color picker, and you're going to pick the bad color, the color you don't like, the color you want to remove. And I'm just going to hit there because it's the most saturated of this band, is kind of right in this area. I'm going to hit there, and you're going to hit OK. Save the new target colors as defaults. Yes. Then what you're going to do is it's going to leave that color picker up, and you're going to pick the color you want to replace it with. Now this is going to be tricky because you you have more greens down here toward the horizon from the air glow and more blue up here. So we're going to need to pick a color that's kind of in both parts. Maybe here. You're going to see it's going to change my whole image and it's going to look crazy, but that's okay. It's done what it's going to do. Close this and we're going to hide it. So click on your mask, Command I to invert, B for brush tool. I'm probably going to want to do this at a low opacity. We'll say 10 to start. Now watch this. We brush in there. Actually making it worse. I think I did it backwards. I did. We'll edit this part out. So let's try this again. I haven't done this in a while because I haven't had to, but top eyedropper. This time we're going to pick our good color. So we picked somewhere in here. Good. Yes. Bad color. Purple. Yes. This looks better. Command I. B for brush tool. Low opacity on white. Now we're going to brush in there. So what it's doing is it's taking all those hues that we didn't like, the purples and the reds and magentas that weren't pure colors, and it's replacing it with the greens and the blues around it. Now Danny Diamond uses this mainly in like blotchy skin areas, kind of red noses, parts where he can't get his skin perfectly even and smooth. But you see what that did here is it kind of just got rid of that area, and now that I'm toggling on and off, I could see that it's maybe a little bit bright. So we open up another curves and we alt clip it to that. Might be able to pull it down. So now, tonally it's the same as the sky around it, but it's blue like the sky around it. So if we zoom way out, toggle it on and off, it's still a little bright. There we go. Toggle it on and off. There. Tonally, it looks much better now. See, this is one of those times where zooming way out made it more apparent. Zoom back in. Command 0 brings you to fit screen, and now that looks much better to me. That red really bugs me. But now we're good. I think this is probably a good place to stop. This image doesn't really need a ton. I might go further and spend more time on either cloning or using the healing brush and taking that plane out, or I might have even used a different sky altogether, but honestly I don't think it does too much damage to this image. And one thing I like to finish all my images with is a little bit of faux Orton effect, we'll call it. It's not the traditional Orton effect technique. It's a little bit simpler, and it's easier, and I think it looks a little bit better than some of the longer, more complex Orton effects with inverted surface blur and crazy high pass layers. This is really simple. You're going to Command Option Shift E on a Mac, and this is going to make a stamp visible layer. This is going to combine all the layers below it into one layer. See, nothing changes. This is just copy of everything below it. I'm actually going to make... Another thing I would do to spend more time is I would go in with the spot healing brush and I would take care of these hot pixels. This one there isn't many in, but there are some here, here. Those are just nitpicky things. I'd probably clone out these lights on the horizon. That's just personal taste. Well, it looks pretty good. So I'm going to do this layer. So I'm actually going to sharpen it. And I'm going to sharpen it with a Smart Sharpen. I'm going to zoom into a 100% on the layer. And I'm going to look at my most prominent and important parts of the image. I'm going to toggle the preview on and off to see how much sharpening it's applying. And because we did so much sharpening beforehand in Lightroom, we don't really need a ton here. You could probably be as low as 100 or 75, again a low radius, and sometimes I'll add this reduced noise. This almost seems counterintuitive. You're trying to sharpen, but you're trying to reduce noise at the same time, and you might apply sharpening here and then reduce noise and find out that all the sharpening you applied above it was mitigated by the noise reduction down here. So it's kind of silly, but there is a balance. And I think this looks pretty good. If you press on your little window here, you can see what it's doing. Again, this is really subtle, but when you're zoomed in 100%, it's really subtle. And then when you zoom out, see it's kind of tremendous. Just a little tiny bit of sharpening just kind of made all these cracks pop, made all this grass pop, and the stars pop a little bit. And now that we've sharpened it, I'm going to copy that layer and I'm going to blur it. I'm going to hit Gaussian Blur on my D750 on images that are 6,000 plus on the long edge. I find that about 30% or 30 for the radius and Gaussian Blur is good, because we're going to knock this way down. It completely blurred our image, but it's okay. And now we're going to clip a curves layer to it by opening up a curves above it, Alt Option, to clip it to that layer. And this is just habit. It's adding a contrast curve or an SCurve to that blur layer is going to help our contrast after we lower the opacity of this layer, because the Gaussian blur blurs it per pixel and it will kind of lower the contrast of an image. So we need to bring some of that contrast back a little bit with a curves layer, but watch this. I typically will go 20%, and it just adds that nice soft glow. I know that we just spent all that time sharpening and then we blurred it, but you almost tend to over sharpen it and then blur it again. And this is a really popular technique in what guys like Mike Taylor and Michael Shamblum, Astro guys that I really look up to. They use this technique, and their images are always that dreamy nightscape, otherworldly, another planet, just jaw-dropping pictures, and I think it's awesome. But I really like what that does. It anything that got really crunchy, maybe the stars were a little bit too sharp. This airplane was really obvious, especially after we sharpened it. Because sharpening is all based on contrast, so it makes your whites whiter and your blacker. So adding this blur just kind of smooths everything out, makes it just much more pleasing to the eye, and I really like what it does. One more thing I might do is a vignette. Open up a curves, drag it down just a little, grab our elliptical marquee tool. We're just gonna center it. Make our foreground color black by hitting X. And then Option Delete is going to fill our selection with black. So it's going to conceal our adjustment. Now you see it's got this stark line there. It would be made even worse if we were to pull our curves way down, but bear with me, this is going to make sense in a second. If we double click on our mask, you see this feather slider. Just pull that feather way over, and then we click on that mask, we'll see what it did. Just kind of feathers those edges. Alt on the mask again. It's adding a little bit of vignette, looks nice. What I typically do, especially on dark images, is I didn't want to darken it too much. I kind of more or less wanted to brighten the center of the image. So we're going to Command J to copy that layer, and Command I to invert. And we're going to click back on our mask and pull up. So, and we might just feather that a little more. So you'll see this one darkened it, this one lightened it. If we take that away, the whole thing's kind of brighter in the center. And I might just group these, turn them on and off so you can see what it does. And that just kind of helps lead the eye further from here to there. It kind of bridges the gap between the bright core of the Milky Way and this kind of bright foreground. Just adds a little pop of brightness right there. See what it does when we zoom way out. Oh yeah, that's nice. So there we go. We've got a finished Milky Way image. Like I said, there's a lot more things you can do here. You can go in and clone these guys out. Spot heal them. Brush healing tool is really nice for this. This is going to be tough to get rid of, only because it's interweaved in trees. We've got a few hot pixels. I might go and spend more time, maybe a little bit more dodging here in the Milky Way, but there's like I said, it's really easy to go overboard and go nuts, and then you realize a couple days later, hey, I went way overboard on that. One thing I'm trying to do lately with my images is process them and sit on them for days and just kind of revisit them, a few times a day, and see if there's anything I can change, anything I'd like to do differently. Because a lot of times I'll post an image that I'm super proud of, and then a few days later I'll just look at it and be like, what was I thinking? And I think this happens a lot in the beginning. When you're learning new things and you're learning and you're getting better, and how quickly you advance and how open you are to critiquing your own work, it's important to do. And being honest with yourself and admitting when you've overcooked an image. And I think it's just kind of one of those things, those rites of passage when you're new. It's everyone saturates their sky like crazy, and greens go nuts, and I think everyone's kind of guilty of that, but everyone finds their way eventually and finds their balance in their kind of trademark, and it's all part of the journey. It's all part of learning who you are as an artist. But I think I've babbled enough, and I think this image looks really cool. And I think that's where we're going to end. So I hope you guys enjoy my first tutorial. I plan on doing a lot more. More advanced masking techniques. More different ways to process the Milky Way, star trails, bracketing exposures and blending exposures for dynamic range and other landscape images, and lots more than that. There's a never-ending supply of things to be learned and taught. So hope you guys kind of stick with me and keep watching my tutorials. Thanks.